I came home to find my mother-in-law living in my office. My wife said she stays. I told her the house was in my name. She didn't believe I would actually sell it. There is a specific smell that I associate with anxiety. It isn't sweat, and it isn't adrenaline. For me, anxiety smells like a mixture of stale cigarette smoke, cheap lavender perfume, and the heavy, suffocating scent of judgment. For 10 years, that smell belonged to one person, my mother-in-law, Barbara. And for 10 years, I successfully kept that smell out of my house. I fought battles over it. I drew lines in the sand. I was the bad guy, the rigid husband, the unwelcoming son-in-law. I accepted those titles because they bought me peace. Until last Tuesday. My name is Michael. I'm 45 years old. I work as a senior project manager for an offshore wind farm in the North Atlantic. It's a brutal, high-stakes job. I spend 2 weeks at a time living on a service operation vessel, surrounded by gray water, gray sky, and machinery that screams in the wind. When you work offshore, home isn't just a place where you keep your stuff. Home is a concept. It's the anchor. It's the promise that keeps you sane when the waves are 30 feet high and the temperature is 10 degrees below freezing. You tell yourself, I can do this shift because in 4 days I will be sitting in my leather chair in my silence, surrounded by warm wood and still air. I thought I had that anchor secured. I thought my wife, Jessica, and I were a team who protected that sanctuary together. I bought our house 5 years before I even met Jessica. That's a detail that becomes very important later in this story. It's a mid-century modern ranch on 3 acres of land, set far back from the road, surrounded by oaks and maples. It wasn't much to look at when I bought it, a foreclosure that had been sitting empty for 2 years. But I saw the bones. I spent 5 years of my life restoring it. I didn't hire contractors. I did it myself on my weeks off. I sanded the original hardwood floors until my knees were raw. I installed the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the woods. I built the deck, plank by plank. That house wasn't just an asset. It was a physical manifestation of my hard work. It was the only place in the world where I could truly decompress. When Jessica and I got engaged, I insisted on a prenup. It wasn't romantic. In fact, it caused the biggest fight of our relationship. Jessica cried. She said I didn't trust her. She said I was planning for failure. I held my ground. I had seen too many guys on the rigs lose everything: houses, pensions, dignity, in messy divorces. I told her, the house remains in my name. I pay the mortgage, the taxes, and the repairs. You pay for groceries and utilities. If we split, you leave with what you brought. She signed it, eventually, and for 6 years, I thought the issue was settled. The problem in our marriage was never really about money, though. It was always Barbara. Barbara is a force of nature if nature was entirely composed of criticism and cigarette smoke. She's the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately locates the one flaw. Oh, you painted this wall blue? Bold choice. I suppose it hides the dirt. You're serving chicken? Again? Well, I guess it's cheap. She hated me from day one. To her, I was blue-collar because I worked with my hands and wore work boots, despite my engineering degree and my 6-figure salary. She wanted Jessica to marry a lawyer or a doctor, someone who could get her into the local country club. Instead, Jessica married a guy who smelled like salt water and sawdust. For 6 years, I managed Barbara by enforcing strict boundaries. She was not allowed to smoke in my house or on my property. She was not allowed to stay overnight. She lived 20 minutes away, so there was no need. And she was absolutely, under no circumstances, allowed in my home office. My office was my holy of holies. It was the room where I kept my drafting table, my collection of vintage nautical maps, my grandfather's humidors, and my guitars. It was the one room in the house that was purely mine. It was soundproofed. It was temperature-controlled for the instruments. It was the place I went to remember who I was when I wasn't being a husband or an employee. Then came the deployment. I left for a routine 2-week rotation on the rigs in late October. The weather was horrific that trip. We had gale force winds that shut down operations for 3 days. We were confined to the vessel, rocking back and forth until half the crew was seasick. It was miserable. I was working 16-hour days when the weather cleared, trying to catch up on the maintenance schedule. I was exhausted, cold, and mentally drained. I texted Jessica every night, clinging to the idea of home. Can't wait to be back. The wind is brutal out here. Missing the quiet. Missing the house. She texted back, always sweet, always reassuring. Miss you too. Stay safe. House is fine. Love you. She never mentioned Barbara. Not once. She didn't mention that Barbara had called. She didn't mention that Barbara was having landlord trouble. She kept it all a secret. I flew back on a Tuesday. I landed at 10 a.m., bleary-eyed and stiff. I drove the hour and a half from the airport in silence, not even turning on the radio. I just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, pour a glass of scotch, and sit in my office for an hour before saying a word to anyone. I pulled into my driveway around noon. The trees were bare, stripped by the autumn wind. The house looked welcoming, warm light spilling from the windows. But then I saw it. There was a beat-up, rusted Toyota Camry parked in my driveway, right next to the garage. Barbara's car. I frowned. Maybe she stopped by for lunch. But why wasn't she parked on the street like I always asked? Then I saw the second thing. There was a pile of black trash bags sitting by the curb. It wasn't trash day. They weren't in the bins. They were just thrown on the grass, wet from the morning rain. My stomach tightened. That specific anxiety smell, the phantom scent of lavender and smoke, suddenly felt very real. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked to the front door. I unlocked it. The smell hit me instantly. It wasn't phantom anymore. It was distinct. Stale cigarette, smoke clinging to the curtains. The cloying sweetness of cheap perfume. And underneath it, the smell of something else, fresh paint. Jessica, I called out, dropping my bag in the foyer. The sound of my boots on the hardwood usually echoed, but the house felt different. Heavier. Cluttered. In the kitchen, she yelled back. Her voice sounded tight, high-pitched. I walked into the kitchen. Jessica was standing at the island, chopping vegetables with a manic intensity. She was wearing an apron I'd never seen before. She didn't look up when I walked in. Hey, she said to the carrots she was aggressively slicing. You're home early. Flight was on time, I said slowly. Why is your mother's car in the driveway? And why does my house smell like a bingo hall? Before she could answer, I heard a noise. A television, blaring a soap opera at max volume. And it wasn't coming from the living room. It was coming from the hallway, from the direction of the east wing, from the direction of my office. I didn't wait for Jessica to explain. I turned on my heel and walked down the hall. The door to my office, which I always kept closed and locked when I was away, was wide open. I stopped in the doorway. I dropped my keys. They hit the floor with a jingle that sounded incredibly loud in the sudden silence of my brain. My office was gone. My drafting table? Gone. My vintage nautical maps, framed in custom oak? Gone. My grandfather's humidors? Gone. My leather Eames chair? Gone. In their place was chaos. A twin bed with a hideous floral comforter was shoved against the wall where my drafting table used to be. A massive, dark wood dresser that looked like it belonged in a haunted Victorian mansion was blocking the window. Boxes of clothes were stacked everywhere. And sitting in a recliner in the corner, a recliner I had never seen before, was Barbara. She was watching a soap opera on a small TV perched on a TV tray. She was holding a lit cigarette. She was ashing into a coffee mug that belonged to me. She looked up at me, took a drag, and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smug, victorious smile. The smile of a squatter who knows they've successfully invaded the castle. Oh, look who's back, she said, smoke curling from her lips. Close the door, Michael. You're letting the draft in. I stood there, paralyzed. I looked at the walls. My beautiful, slate-gray walls, painted specifically to absorb light for drafting, were gone. They had been painted over. A sickly, patchy shade of pastel peach. It looked like the inside of a stomach. I turned around slowly. Jessica was standing behind me, twisting a dish towel in her hands. She looked terrified, but also defiant. What is this? I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. It was the voice I used on the rig when a turbine was malfunctioning and we were seconds away from a catastrophic failure. Where's my office, Jessica? Michael, please don't get mad, she started, the words tumbling out fast. Mom got evicted. Evicted? Her landlord is selling the building. She got the notice 2 weeks ago. She had nowhere to go, Michael. She called me crying. She was going to be homeless. I couldn't let my mother live on the street. So, you move her into my office? It was the only room with space, she insisted. The guest room is full of your storage stuff. That was a lie. The guest room had a queen bed and a closet. But the guest room was smaller. She wanted Barbara to have this suite. Where's my stuff, Jessica? I asked, pointing to the empty spaces on the walls. Where are my maps? Where are my instruments? She looked at the floor. We moved it to the garage. The air left my lungs. You moved my guitars to the garage? I whispered. In late October? Jessica, it's 40 degrees and damp in there. Those are acoustic instruments. The humidity alone will warp the necks. They're fine, she snapped, finding her courage. Look, it's just temporary. Until she find a place. Stop caring more about your stupid wooden toys than my mother. Barbara chimed in from the room, not even bothering to mute the TV. I'm not going to nursing home, Michael. I'm 65, not 90. Jessica said I could stay as long as I needed. We're family. This is what family does. We make sacrifices. I looked at Barbara. I watched her flick ash onto the floor, my hardwood floor that I had sanded by hand. You're smoking in my house, I said. It's just one, she waved her hand dismissively. God, you're uptight. No wonder you have high blood pressure. Maybe if you relax a little, your wife wouldn't be so stressed all the time. I looked at Jessica. She has to go. Jessica's face hardened. This was the moment. This was the crossroads. She's not going anywhere, Michael, Jessica said firmly. She's my mother. She lives here now. You're gone half the month anyway. You don't even use this room when you're away. I built this room, I said. I paid for this house. Every nail, every board. It's our house, she said, crossing her arms. We're married. Everything is ours. Stop being so selfish. You can set up your little drawing table in the basement. The basement, an unfinished, concrete box with no windows where I kept the furnace and the water heater. So that's it, I asked. You made a unilateral decision to move a smoker into my home, paint my walls peach, and evict me from my own sanctuary, and I just have to deal with it? Yes, she said, because that's what marriage is. Compromise. This isn't compromise, I said. This is a hostile takeover. I walked past her. I went out the side door to the garage. I needed to see the damage. My stuff was piled in the corner near the lawnmower. It was a disaster. My vintage maps had been pulled off the walls and shoved into a cardboard box without bubble wrap. I could see the glass on one frame was cracked. My drafting supplies were tossed into a bin with gardening tools. And there, leaning against a bag of potting soil, was my 1968 Martin D28, my father's guitar. It was in its case, but the case was sitting directly on the concrete floor. Concrete wicks moisture. I opened the case. The air inside felt cold and clammy. I took the guitar out. I ran my hand down the neck. It felt swollen. The action was high. It wasn't ruined yet, but another week out here, it would have been firewood. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. It was a physical sensation like stepping out of a hot room into a blizzard. The anger evaporated, replaced by pure, mechanical resolve. I realized then that my marriage was over. It hadn't ended today. It had ended the moment Jessica decided that my feelings, my property, and my boundaries were less important than her mother's comfort. She had broken the contract. I carefully packed my guitars into the back of my truck. I took the box with my maps. I took the fireproof box with my passport and the deed to the house. I went back inside. Jessica was in the kitchen, making tea for Barbara. They were laughing about something. The sound of their laughter felt like a knife. Where are you going? Jessica asked, seeing my keys in my hand. I'm going to a hotel, I said. I need to decompress. I can't be here right now. Oh, stop being dramatic, she rolled her eyes. You're acting like a child throwing a tantrum. Come have dinner. Mom made meatloaf. I'm not eating meatloaf with a woman who just desecrated my sanctuary, I said. I'll be back tomorrow to discuss the arrangement. Fine, she huffed. Go pout. But don't expect us to be awake when you come crawling back. I drove to the Marriott in town. I checked into a suite. I ordered a club sandwich and a pot of coffee. I didn't sleep. I spent the entire night on my laptop. First, I checked the county records online. Title, Michael J. Brennan. No other names. Second, I pulled up the digital copy of our prenup. I read the clauses about premarital assets. Specific property owned prior to union remains sole property of original owner. Third, I checked real estate laws in my state regarding tenants at will. Because Jessica wasn't on the deed, she had no ownership rights. Because Barbara wasn't on a lease and hadn't paid rent, she was a guest. But because Jessica, my wife, had invited her, it was tricky. I needed a nuclear option. I needed to cut the knot, not untie it. The next morning, Wednesday, I made a phone call at 8 a.m. sharp. I have an old friend, Dave, who runs a real estate investment firm. They buy houses for cash, usually from people in foreclosure or messy estates. They pay under market value, but they close in days. No inspections, no contingencies. Dave, I said when he picked up, you know my place? Yeah, the mid-century on the ridge. I love that house. What? It's for sale. Dave laughed. Bullshit. You love that house. You talk about that house like it's your kid. Not anymore, I said. It has a termite infestation. A big one. Her name is Barbara. Dave paused. The humor left his voice. You serious, Mike? You want to sell? Now. I want to sell today. Cash offer. As is. I don't care about the market price. I want enough to pay off the remaining mortgage and walk away with a clean break. But there's a catch. What's the catch? It's occupied. You have to handle the eviction. You have to be the bad guy. Dave whistled. That's messy, Mike. Occupied properties are a headache, especially if it's family. I'll knock 50 grand off the appraisal price, I said, and I'll leave you the John Deere tractor in the shed. Done, Dave said immediately. I can have the paperwork ready by noon. We could do a subject to transfer or just a straight cash close. Since you own it outright minus the mortgage, we can record the deed transfer tomorrow. Let's do it. I met Dave at his office at noon. I signed the papers. My hand didn't shake. I sold my dream house, the house I restored with my own sweat and blood, for about 75% of what it was worth. I didn't care about the money. I cared about the exit. Then I went to a lawyer's office down the street. I paid a retainer. I had him draft two things, a divorce petition and a formal letter explaining that the property had been sold. On Thursday morning, I drove back to the house. I pulled into the driveway. Barbara's car was still there. The trash bags were still on the lawn. I walked in. It was 11 a.m. Jessica and Barbara were in the living room, watching TV. Barbara had her feet up on my coffee table, shoes on. She was eating toast and getting crumbs everywhere. Oh, look who decided to come home, Barbara sneered without looking away from the screen. Done pouting. Jessica stood up. She looked annoyed, but also relieved. Michael, I'm glad you're back. Listen, we need to talk about the basement. Mom thinks we should finish it so you can have a proper space down there. I called a contractor this morning. It's going to cost about $20,000, but I think it's worth it for family harmony. I looked at them. The audacity was breathtaking. They were planning to spend my money to renovate a basement for me in my own house, while she lived in my office like a queen. We don't need to talk about the basement, I said. What do we need to talk about then? Jessica crossed her arms. We need to talk about the house. What about it? I sold it. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. The only sound was the TV chatter. Jessica blinked, her brain unable to process the words. What? I sold a house. Yesterday. The closing process has started. The deed transfer is being recorded today. You can't sell the house, Jessica laughed nervously, looking at her mother. He's joking, Mom. It's our home. He can't just sell it. It's my house. I corrected her gently. Check the deed. Check the prenup. And as of yesterday afternoon, I signed a purchase agreement with D&G Investments. You're lying, Barbara spat, standing up. He's bluffing, Jess. He's just trying to scare us into doing what he wants. Don't fall for it. Men always try to use money to control women. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a large manila envelope. I pulled out copies of the sale agreement and the notice from the new owners. These are for you, I said, placing them on the coffee table right next to Barbara's feet. This is a notice to vacate. Because the property has changed ownership, all current occupants are considered tenants at will. The new owners, D&G Investments, have given you 30 days to leave the premises. After that, they will file for formal eviction with the sheriff's department. Jessica picked up the papers. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. She read the bold text. Notice to vacate. She saw the signature. She saw the purchase price. Michael, she whispered, looking up at me with horror. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, I said. Maybe you can find a nice 2-bedroom apartment. I hear the complex on 4th Street has vacancies. They allow smoking on the balconies. You can't do this to me, she screamed, dropping the papers. I'm your wife. This is my home. And she's your mother, I said, pointing to Barbara. You chose her. You moved her in without asking me. You let her destroy my workspace. You told me I had to deal with it. Well, Jessica, I dealt with it. But I have no money. I can't afford an apartment. I can't support her on my salary. You have a job, I said, and Barbara has her Social Security. I'm sure you'll figure it out. That's what family does, right? Struggle together. Barbara advanced on me, her face purple with rage. You son of a bitch. You selfish, arrogant bastard. You can't kick an old woman out on the street. You're not on the street, I said, checking my watch. You have 30 days. That's plenty of time to pack. Although, considering you treated my office like a dumpster, I suggest you start cleaning now so you don't get sued for damages. I turned to leave. Michael, please. Jessica grabbed my arm. She was crying now, real, ugly tears. The panic had finally set in. I'm sorry. I'll kick her out. I'll move her to a motel today. I promise. Just call them back. Cancel the sale. Please don't divorce me. I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had loved. I looked for any spark of empathy, any connection. But all I saw was a stranger who had stood by while her mother painted my walls peach. It's too late, Jess, I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. The papers are signed. The house isn't mine anymore. And frankly, neither are you. I walked out. I got in my truck. I drove away without looking back. I spent the next 2 weeks in a corporate apartment provided by my company. I blocked Jessica's number. I blocked Barbara's number. I communicated only through my lawyer. My lawyer handled the rest. Because of the prenup, the divorce was surgically precise. She got half of our joint savings account, which was about $5,000, and her car. She got 0 equity in the house because she never contributed to the mortgage or the down payment. She left the marriage with exactly what she brought into it: her clothes, her car, and her mother. The new owners, Dave's company, weren't as nice as I was. When the 30 days were up, Jessica and Barbara hadn't moved out. They thought they could squat. They thought if they just stayed, no one would force them out. They underestimated Dave. Dave sent the sheriff. My sister lives in town, and she drove by that day. She sent me a text. Just saw Jessica and Barbara on the front lawn. The sheriff is there. They have all their boxes piled on the grass. It's drizzling rain. They look miserable. I read that text while sitting in an airport lounge, waiting for my flight back to the North Sea. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt relief. The weight was gone. The smell of anxiety was gone. That was 6 months ago. The house was gutted by Dave's crew. They tore out the peach walls. They tore out the smoke-stained carpets. They renovated the kitchen. They flipped it for a massive profit. I drove by it once when I was back in town to sign the final divorce papers. It looked different. Painted white. Different landscaping. It wasn't my house anymore. and I was okay with that. I didn't buy another house. Not yet. I transferred to a new project in the North Sea. I spend most of my time in Scotland now. I live in a small apartment in Aberdeen. It has big windows overlooking the harbor. It has exposed brick walls and heated floors. It's quiet. I bought a new drafting table. I bought a new Martin guitar, a vintage D18 this time. Last week, I got an email from Jessica. It went to my spam folder, but I checked it. Mike, Mom is in a state-run facility now. She hates it. She calls me every day crying. I'm living in a studio apartment above a garage. It smells like cat pee from the downstairs neighbor. I miss the house. I miss the woods. I miss you. I realized I made a mistake. I realized I shouldn't have let her take over. Please call me. We can fix this. I looked at the email. I sat there in my quiet apartment, listening to the rain against the glass. I thought about the peach walls. I thought about the smoke in the curtains. I thought about my guitar sitting on the concrete floor. I hit delete. Some foundations are cracked beyond repair. You can't patch them. You can't paint over them. If you try to build on them, the whole thing will just collapse on top of you eventually. The only thing you can do is condemn the building, tear it down to the dirt, and go build something new somewhere else. Somewhere the air is clean. Have you ever had a boundary crossed so vaguely that you had to go nuclear to escape? Have you ever had a partner choose their toxic parent over your marriage? Share your story in the comments. I read them all, usually with a glass of scotch in hand. And if you believe that a man's home is a sanctuary and that no is a complete sentence, hit that like button and subscribe. Because sometimes the only way to win the war is to sell the battlefield. Hashtag Echoes of Home.